Trafficking human beings for labor. Nancy, this is a topic you've spent some time working on. Give us some sense of what does that look like on the ground?
It looks murky on the ground. I think we've spoken about human trafficking in terms of trafficking people for commercial sex for the past decade. In 2000, the federal government passed the first national legislation regarding human trafficking, which is called the TVPA, and it defines human trafficking in general as using, in short, force, fraud, or coercion to compel an individual to perform sex or labor acts for the profit of another. And for many years we focused on sex trafficking. It's horrific to most people, sometimes involves children, women, always vulnerable populations and individuals. And labor trafficking is more perhaps embedded into the fabric of all societies, harder to discern, and therefore has received less attention, is now beginning to be discussed.
So, say more about being embedded into the fabric of society because I suspect that there are viewers who are going, of course not. I would never condone such a thing as labor trafficking. How could you say that? So, what does that mean?
Well, I think what it means is that we are all consumers and we are all engaged in supply chains where someone produces a product that I purchase or I borrow, or perhaps I'm a producer. And complexity of supply chains in our modern society is tremendous. We often don't know or have no idea the source of the product that we're purchasing. We don't think about it. We think about getting a good price in the grocery store, in the market, for our clothing. It never occurs to us that we may be complicit, if you will, in a labor supply chain that is abusive.
So, describe for us a labor trafficking scenario in North Carolina. I don't want to say a typical scenario because there may not be such a thing as a typical scenario, but something that people can now sort of wrap their heads around as a picture of what is happening.
Sure. Well, Polaris Project operates a national human trafficking hotline, and they're one of the primary sources of data around both labor and sex trafficking in the United States. In 2017, they received 221 phone calls from North Carolina. Now, those calls could mean that someone was seeking information about a labor trafficking issue, or they could be reporting a suspicion. It could be an individual who suspected that they were being trafficked. Of those calls, 51 regarded labor, 16 involved perhaps sex and labor.
Okay.
Those calls came from a variety of industries. Polaris also has used the data that they've collected over the years from these calls from across the country to identify 25 business models of trafficking. They include such things as individuals who are here on temporary guest worker visas, on roadside begging, carnival work, health and beauty. In effect, it cuts across all industries. In North Carolina, it will look different in every locale. North Carolina is located geographically in the middle of the United States. So we have access north and south. Our roadways run west. We have a lot of tourism. We have lots of, we know that North Carolina has grown by leaps and bounds, so we have a somewhat, at least initially, transient population that comes in, people either moving to the state or coming here to vacation. Our military population, agriculture is a huge industry. So in other words, the fabric of our economy is such that there are many points of entry for trafficking in this state.
When did you first get involved in this
I
work?
first got involved in this work and couldn't name it for what I would now call trafficking as a direct service provider through a faith-based community. And I worked largely, but not only, with rural folks, those who had lived here for generations, as well as newcomers who were not native born and were coming to work on farms, primarily tobacco, also sweet potatoes and other crops, and immigrant families. And so we know that when people are vulnerable, predators, exploiters, abusers, traffickers can move into the gaps between regulatory systems, the fabric of our society, and exploit those individuals.
Could you tell us the story of a particular client that has stuck with you
Sure.
all these years?
I was at home one morning getting ready for work, 7 o'clock in the morning, received a phone call from an accountant friend that I knew who was originally from Ecuador, spoke Spanish, was at his gym working out when a young girl ran into the gym crying and screaming in Spanish, "Help me, help me." Nobody else in the gym spoke Spanish, and she recognized that he did, ran to him. He said, "What's happening?" And all she could say was, "They're after me, please help me." So his office was nearby the gym. He brought the girl there. Within a minute or 2 minutes, two people were pounding on the door. He had the sense to lock the door. Were pounding, and it was a man and a woman that were pounding on the door and shouting at her in another language, which he later realized was her indigenous dialect. He didn't know what to do. We had worked together over the years, so he called me. I came down, took me about 25 minutes to get to my office. When I got there, he was there with the girl who was visibly distraught. He left. She came into my office, started to tell me her story, which was that she was from a small village in the state of Oaxaca in Mexico. Spanish is not her first language. They were very poor, owned no land of their own. She was 17, felt responsible for her family, and became friends with a woman from her village who told her about a great job opportunity in the United States. So the girl, in essence, ran away from home and came with this woman who she saw as a known, trusted person, and that's often what happens. The recruitment is not through the malevolent stranger in the corner, but actually by someone that's known and trusted to the individual. And she was brought up, she thinks, to California and then across the country. She didn't read either Spanish or English, so didn't really have any sense of where she was. Got to the United States, knew she was in the United States, and then this couple began compelling her to perform both sex and labor acts for no pay and with no consent.
And so, what are the resources available to a victim of labor trafficking? What do you do with this young woman?
Well, this is how I got involved because, and that happened perhaps 9 years ago, and our safety net was riddled with gaps. So fortunately, the law enforcement in the local area had recently participated in what is now mandatory 2-hour training around human trafficking. So I called local law enforcement.
And so now all law
enforcement
participate in this training?
Yes, across the state.
Thanks.
So we are leading in that area. And it was an interesting reaction because the man who came said, he was joking, and he said, "Oh, we all had to go through this training, and we all thought we will never see this in our careers.
Wow.
Wait till I go back to the station and I tell everybody, and I know what to do." So he had the capacity to work with us. The traffickers were brazen. They came to my office before the law enforcement officer got there. And I had a long floor-to-ceiling window in my office with a couch. The girl was on the couch. She saw, it was the woman who came to my office. She saw her. My door was locked, but I had a window. She looked in, and I truly have never seen panic like that. The girl tried to go out the closed window just to run away. And the woman was shouting through the office door in her indigenous language, which I don't speak. I'm bilingual in Spanish. And, but I was struck. They saw the girl as a commodity who could make money for them, and they were not about to let that go.
So, Nancy, this has led you to dedicate your career to working on these kinds of issues. How much better situated are North Carolina's communities to respond to this kind of circumstance today?
We are much better situated now. I think that across the state there's an increasing awareness of what human trafficking looks like, what some of the indicators might be, and hand in hand with that, we've increased our response. There are organizations like faith-based organizations that provide direct outreach and service to individuals. Legal Aid of North Carolina has been leading the prosecutorial fight for many years. The North Carolina Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Labor, the Human Trafficking Commission, as well as NC-CAT, which is the North Carolina Commission Against Human Trafficking, NC-CASA. So many, many non-governmental agencies, local government, faith-based organizations, and different entities, our law enforcement, DA's offices are coming together to realize that this is an insidious problem, and it's only going to be effectively addressed when we come together.
Well, that's certainly heartening. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I failed to ask you?
I would just like to say that there are resources available for all of us. The U.S. Department of Labor, for instance, maintains a web page that anyone can access that lists countries and products that are produced by child labor, by forced labor. So there are resources for the individual who would want to learn more. Project No Rest, for whom I work at the School of Social Work at Chapel Hill, has a website where information can be gleaned about what's going on in the state. The groups that I mentioned prior put out information.
Terrific. Well, it is heartening to hear that there are resources available, although really maddening to hear that this is as prevalent a situation in North Carolina as it is. Thank you so very much for being with us.
I appreciate it. Thank you.